Welcome to week 3 of Public Speaking and Persuasion. This week we will talk about occasion speeches. These speeches happen in real-life situations, and it is likely that you will be asked or required to give one or more of these speeches at some point in your lifetime. Click the arrow to advance to the next slide, and let's get started. There are several categories of occasion speeches. The first, according to the Practically Speaking textbook, are tribute speeches, which are meant to praise or celebrate a person or group. Perhaps the most familiar kind of tribute speech is a toast. If you've ever attended a wedding, you have very likely heard a toast. These are usually given by the maid or matron of honor and the best man. Sometimes other members of the bridal party, parents, clergy, or other significant people in the bride and groom's lives also speak. Toasts typically follow the format of first talking about who you are most close with, the bride or the groom, and then about how that person met their significant other. Then, how well they get along together. It almost always ends with asking the audience to raise a glass and actually toasting the bride or groom. A caution. If you know that you will be giving a toast, be cautious of the effects of alcohol. You don't want to say something that could be offensive, and you don't want to forget something in your speech entirely. Perhaps you would even wait until after you speak to have a drink. You might have also heard a roast at some point. A roast still honors the person, but it does so by poking fun, often in wildly exaggerated one-liners. Regardless of the jokes, you should always end with a positive note. A roast should be brief, but it should be heartfelt. A retirement speech honors the retiree, typically by thanking them for their service and highlighting some of the major points of the career, including any awards that person won or significant projects that they completed. If you've ever been to a funeral, you've likely heard a eulogy, which is Greek for to praise. A eulogy honors a deceased person. While the eulogy provides a highlight of the deceased person's life, it also offers hope for those who are grieving. You don't have to be somber, but you should be careful with humor as it might offend some people. Also, be careful about exaggerating how good the person was. Be balanced, but be realistic. Since you're all in college, I'm going to assume that you graduated from high school. During your graduation, someone likely gave a commencement address. These speeches are meant to inspire the graduates and thank those who helped them to get where they are. The caution here is to remember that there are all ages in the audience, from very young siblings to grandparents. Make your speech appropriate for everyone. Finally, after-dinner speeches take place at some kind of formal gathering. If you've ever played a sport or were involved in an organization, you've likely heard an after-dinner speech. These kinds of speeches don't have to happen after dinner. They can happen after any meal or before any meal, and don't even have to have a meal involved at all, though they usually do. They are typically combined with a presentation of some kind, and we'll talk about that later. Click the arrow to next learn about introduction speeches. The next kind of occasion speech, according to Practically Speaking, is an introduction speech. Speakers may be asked to introduce a featured speaker, usually someone who is famous or at least well known by the audience. In this case, the speaker's job is to create enthusiasm for the featured speaker. Remember, you are not the main focus. Highlight the featured speaker's qualities, but do not exaggerate. You run the risk of embarrassing the speaker and setting too high a standard for them to follow. If you are introducing someone, be sure to say their name correctly and be familiar with their characteristics and achievements. Also, do not read this speech because that shows that you don't know the person very well. Next, we'll talk about presenting and accepting awards. Click the arrow to advance to the next slide. Speakers may give speeches when presenting or accepting an award. When presenting an award, you are doing something very similar to introducing someone, but with an award involved. In this situation, you would first talk about the significance of the award, then explain why this person is most deserving. If you are receiving an award, your speech is meant to thank those who helped you get here. Avoid being falsely humble, but be appreciative and genuine. You should also mention the runner or runners up and thank them if they have contributed to your success. In either case, know the proper behavior. Present or accept the award with your left hand and shake with your right hand. You've likely heard these speeches during award ceremonies or shows, like during a sports banquet or the Grammys or the Emmys, etc. Click the arrow to check your understanding so far. It's time for the chapter checkup. Think of speeches you've heard and or seen. What has the speaker done to fit his or her speech to the occasion? Take a minute, jot down some notes, then click the arrow to advance to the next slide. Style is important to all kinds of speaking, but especially in speaking for special occasions. Chapter 9 talks about using linguistic style to achieve excellent speeches. Click the arrow to learn more about style. According to Practically Speaking, your speaking style reveals an identity and makes your speech memorable, sometimes in ways one might wish to forget. Everyone has their own speaking style. While there are qualities of style, each person uses them differently. Sometimes your speaking style isn't something that you like, and you might have to work to change it. When I first started student teaching, I used a lot of fillers. I didn't even realize I was doing it until I had to deliver my first lesson plan, which was recorded. My next assignment was to watch back my recording and criticize it. That wasn't too difficult since I was appalled by how I sounded. I worked diligently to change my style, and while I still have some work to do, I've made great progress, and you can too. One of my early colleagues had a sign in his classroom that said, "If you can speak, you can write, but please don't write how you speak." Speaking style and writing style are very different. Click the arrow to advance to the next slide and talk about the differences. By now, you should have already completed the activities in your hyperbook, including reading the few documents that I provided links to in that document. Now, let's take a look at what you came up with in the activity in the hyperbook. First, written language is permanent, where spoken language is more temporary. This means that written language can be reviewed, while speeches can't unless they're recorded, and even then, you lose some meaning in the setting. Speaking of setting, written language crosses time and space. Books written long ago are still favorites, and we call them classics today. While speeches can also be classics, like Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, which we will look at in this class, the real meaning is found only in the specific situation in which the speech was delivered. Next, writing uses complex language with proper grammar, punctuation, sentence structure, etc. Spoken language uses more simple language structure, making it easier for the audience to quickly process what is being said and comprehend the idea. Writers write books, and they have no idea what the reader on the other end is thinking while they're reading. Speakers, on the other hand, can get immediate feedback from their audience members. This is why we call speaking a transactional process. Do you remember that from the checkup question? This means that the speaker sends and receives information, as does the audience. Think about this. What are some positive and negative feedback actions that the audience can send to the speaker? Next, as I mentioned, writing uses sentence structure with punctuation, layout, graphics, and more to communicate meaning. Speakers don't have any of these things because the words they're speaking can't be seen by the audience. Instead, the audience relies on verbal and nonverbal cues to communicate meaning. You can tell by the speaker's facial expressions, gestures, tone, volume, and more how they feel and what mood they want to communicate to the audience. Writers have to try very hard to communicate these things in an exciting way, through just words. Finally, one way that writers communicate meaning is by choosing words deliberately and precisely. Instead of saying that a character was mad, they might say that he was furious or absolutely enraged. Word choice is important in speaking too, but it's more dynamic, whereas written language is more static. Click the button below to advance to the next slide. There is also a difference between traditional speaking style and that taking place in the electronic age. Traditional style is factual and analytical. People had longer attention spans then than they do today, so speakers could be long-winded and the audience would still listen. Today, our attention spans are shorter than they used to be. The electronic age has marked by dramatic narratives and are shorter and more precise. So how do you give it an effective speech for today's audience? Blend factual information with interesting stories and provide relevant, attention-getting strategies to gain and maintain your audience's attention. Let's talk about this. Click the arrow to advance to the next slide. We talked last week about how to become a competent speaker, and we're going to continue that discussion regarding style. A competent speaker should strive for clarity through simple, concise language and avoiding technical jargon unless it's absolutely necessary, in which case you should define it if it would be unfamiliar to the audience members. You should also choose your words carefully. Besides avoiding offensive, sexist language, you should also use a thesaurus to choose words that mean exactly what you're trying to say. Finally, use your words to paint a picture for your listeners. Strategies like metaphor, simile, cliché, alliteration, repetition, antithesis, and more can all be used effectively to do this. Click to the next slide to check your understanding so far. It's time for the chapter checkup. Think about your own speaking style. What would you like to continue doing? What would you like to change? If you'd like to speak to me specifically about what or how you can improve your speaking style, I'm happy to do that. That does it for this week. If you have any questions, please email, call, or text me.